So, the combat trailer came out for the Silent Hill 2 remake the other day, and I've made it no secret that I was not pleased with it. The original Silent Hill 2 is my favorite game of all time, and I'm not even close to being the only one who was extremely upset by the decisions Bloober Team made with a number of things in the remake. But like most things, I've found that there are still a lot of people who disagree with the criticisms I and many other longtime fans of the original game have, and that's where this video comes in. I want to take a look at some of the big defenses of the Silent Hill 2 remake and really lay out for you why they're not good defenses at all. And I want to frame this video less like my other more fanboy-oriented response videos and instead take a more informative and informational approach to this, because I truly believe that if you don't see the massive glaring issues with the Silent Hill 2 trailer, like the issues that a lot of fans had with this, I think it comes down to a fundamental lack of understanding as to why the original is held up to such a high esteem. Like, I'm not trying to dump on you if you're just excited about the new Resident Evil clone. I'm trying to inform you as to why so many of us are angry that it exists in the way that it does. And as pretentious as that introduction sounds, I think it's a fun topic to talk about. Because reading through the comments of the trailer and of videos talking about the trailer, there really does seem to be a disconnect between people who played the original and people who didn't as to why this combat trailer was so divisive. And just to, just so we're all on the same page, here's the official like to dislike ratio, and then here's the like to dislike ratio of the IGN re-upload. It's not looking good either way. So pull up a chair and turn on your fog machine, and let's talk a bit about why Silent Hill 2 is special and why the remake has completely missed the point. We'll take a look at some of the common defenses of the remake, and we'll break them down a bit and have a nice little discussion, you and me, okay? So, by far the most talked about aspect of the new gameplay footage is how combat-oriented it is, and how obviously Konami or Bloober Team, or both, wanted to replicate the gameplay loop of the Resident Evil remakes instead of sticking to the slower pace of the original, which had very little actual combat situations, and the combat mechanics were notoriously shit. I mentioned in my last Silent Hill 2 video that this is less of a problem with the game itself and more of a deliberate choice, and I think this tweet is really nice. Then I'll put it on a screen right here so you can stare at it. But the massive change in gameplay and moment-to-moment combat has led to a lot of heated debates on Twitter and YouTube from both sides of the aisle arguing over the combat. On one side of the aisle, you have the people who think the shit combat and slow pace of the original were crucial to its overall effect on the player. And then on the other side of the aisle, you have the people who look at the shit combat and slow pace of the original and think the only way to update it for a modern remake is to completely change it from a fundamental level and make it more like Resident Evil. Never mind the fact that Resident Evil has you playing as trained agents, and Silent Hill has you playing as a random fucking dude with no combat experience, and up until today didn't think monsters existed. Gee, I do sure wonder if changing the gameplay of the original in this way will have an inherently negative effect on the way we perceive the main character. Hey, quick interruption. This channel is sponsored by 4D Gaming, and 4D Gaming is currently having a big 15% off site-wide anniversary sale. And guess what? The 15% stacks with my code Joe for an additional discount. So if you've been looking to get a really nice mouse pad or just generally spruce up your gaming desk, go check out 4dgaming.com and use code Joe for a discount on top of the 15% off anniversary discount going on site-wide until February 7th. Thank you for your time. But let's just look at some of the tweets I saw from both sides of the aisle. I'm really doing my best to be, impartial here. Cameron says, Silent Hill fans, 2 is awesome, but the combat sucked. Konami drops a trailer to highlight a change in perspective and give a taste of the combat. Silent Hill fans, what is this? Resident Evil 4? Is this an action game? How could you do this? Why are you forcing us to fight? Whereas Totally Pointless says, thank God, I've said it for years. The one thing Silent Hill 2 was missing, the only thing stopping it from being a masterpiece, fucking quick time events to escape an armless monster. At Stop Skeleton says, seen some people upset that Silent Hill 2 Remake has over-the-shoulder action like the RE remakes, not sure what you people expected. And then Clay says, from the creators of Baby running into wall and vaporizing comes Silent Hill 2, but bad. At Succinct Punchy says, these are among the more upvoted comments on the Silent Hill 2 remake trailer, and like were people just expecting this game to have no combat at all or something? Combat is one of the core ludic interactions of Silent Hill 2. You spend like 70% of that game fighting stuff. What? And then they attach 2 screenshots of one person saying, oh yes, the combat, the thing that everyone remembers and loves about Silent Hill 2. The other one saying, can't think of a game less appropriate to have a gun shoot bang montage. Now, I think the split here comes from a weird misunderstanding that a lot of people seem to have regarding what makes a game scary, and I think you can blame the loud jump scare gore houndness of the last, I'd say, 2 decades of AAA horror. But what I consider to be a big misunderstanding is this: violence is not a necessity to a good horror experience. And if you disagree with that, it's not surprising why you are in favor of the Resident Evil-ness present in the Silent Hill 2 remake. I would argue that violence, in many cases, actually takes away from a truly unnerving horror experience. Not all the time, but a lot of the time, because adding an action aspect to your game does one of 2 things, if not both of them. Number 1, it inherently cheapens the threat of monsters/villains by showing the protagonist is capable of killing them. And number 2, it puts a cap on the amount of fear the viewer/player will feel, because no matter what, the viewer/player will become desensitized to the violence at some point, and it will no longer scare them. Changing James into a more capable fighter inherently cheapens the horror of the original game, because in the original game, combat was either a fear response or a last resort. Someone said that in the comment section of my original Silent Hill 2 video, and I think that was a great way to put it. Keeping James vulnerable and the most basic enemies threatening was a major part of the original game, and I'm honestly confused as to how you can have possibly played the original game and thought 70% of it was in combat. Like, you know you're allowed to run away from most of the monsters, right? Like, when something pops up in the street, you didn't have to fight it. It all adds to this feeling of genuine helplessness and paranoia when you're running around the town. And turning James into Leon Kennedy inherently cheapens that. I'm gonna flash this on screen again. Shit combat is not always something that has to be changed and improved to, quote, better combat. Sometimes the shit combat in itself is part of the immersion. But if you've only played AAA horror games from the last decade or 2, where everything is very loud, everything's very bloody, everything's very in your face, and there's nothing wrong with that, because I love a lot of the games like that. But if that's what you think a horror game has to be, it's not surprising that you don't have the inherent negative feeling about this game's combat changes. You know, at least when it comes to being a spiritual successor or a recreation of the original game's vision. The change in combat is an inherent contradiction of the original game's vision. And I believe that this inherently takes a lot of the potential fear that could be taken out of the Silent Hill 2 concept. But aside from the combat being changed and the game pace obviously being sped up, there's also a lot of really obvious issues with the art design and lighting that were absolutely crucial to the original. This tweet puts it really well. The remake looks too clean. The original had this palpable layer of grime that you could almost smell. You felt like it was going to start oozing out of your TV. Just incredible texture work. And I'll put these screenshots on full screen and you can just see for yourself. The original Silent Hill 2 can make you uneasy just by looking at it. It made you feel like you needed a shower. There was just something about it that made you feel paranoid just walking around the map. The sheer effort that went into making this game feel as dirty and uncomfortable as possible was insane. And that's simply not in the remake, down to the weird lack of fog outdoors and the seemingly total lack of grime and dirtiness indoors, because if the remake was super foggy and dirty and grimy, it would be too obstructive for the shooting gallery bits. And obviously that's the important part of Silent Hill 2. Didn't you know that, dear viewer? Remember that game you liked back in 2001 because it had a bunch of things that made it unique? Yeah, actually, you don't want those things anymore. Those things weren't what made it good. We know better than you. We're Bloober Team. Whee! And before anyone says anything, I'm not asking for a one-to-one remake. None of us are asking for a one-to-one remake. I was fully expecting this game to be over the shoulder, but I don't think having an over-the-shoulder adaptation of Silent Hill 2 is inherently a problem. I think there were plenty of ways they could have made an authentic Silent Hill 2 remake with modern graphics and an over-the-shoulder perspective, while still respecting the not Resident Evilness of the gameplay. They could have done all those things and still made you feel vulnerable. They could have done all those things and still made the monsters feel threatening. Being able to go around every corner with a shotgun, or tread through uncharted territory with the full knowledge of how you can dispatch enemies and like where their weak spots are. It's just inherently going to take away from what the original game was built upon. And it seems like every problem that fans of the original game have with the remake and what we've seen of it, every bad design change in the remake comes back to that. They wanted to make the game more action-oriented and more like the Resident Evil remakes, which means all of these other aspects of the original game simply cannot be recreated, because that's how drastic of a change this is to the original game's presentation and gameplay and pacing. The point I'm trying to make is that there were so many things about the original game that were crucial to its energy and its experience, and the fact that all of those things have been seemingly omitted or changed really just makes it feel like nobody working on the remake even played the original. The Resident Evil remakes are a good example of what I mean. They maintain the experience and the energy and the vibes of the original games while updating the gameplay in a way that makes sense to that franchise and to that game. Yes, Resident Evil 2 was shifted to an over-the-shoulder perspective, but they still kept the original's energy and pace and presentation for the most part. It was a great adaptation. The Silent Hill 2 remake doesn't feel like that. It feels like the energy and presentation of the original have been disregarded, and the gameplay hasn't been updated in a sensible way. Rather, it's been updated in a way that doesn't fit the tone of the original at all, to the point that you have to question who even greenlit this and who they thought they were making the game for, because it's certainly not being made for fans of the original, and it's also been so fundamentally ruined that it can't possibly have the same impact on new players as the original did back in 2001. And as for appealing to new players, I guess you can get some of the people who like the RE remakes, even though yours looks infinitely less polished. Like, that's what I mean when I say, who is this game for? The problem with the Silent Hill 2 remake isn't that it's not a one-to-one recreation of the original. The problem is that it seems to completely disregard what made the original special, and it's made all the more frustrating by the fact that Konami has done absolutely nothing to properly preserve the original game. So if you want to play Silent Hill 2, this is going to basically be the only legitimate option, which is heartbreaking to someone who loves the original game so much. In conclusion, hope it was worth it. Bloober Team, great work. Great work here. Konami, you did a good job making people like you again. No. Goodbye, Toodles.